This is The Last Hike, and today you'll find out what happens to the arrogant couple who dismissed one of the hottest places on Earth as a warm and easy afternoon trip. They were not soft tourists who had never felt the sun. They had lived in the desert their whole lives, and they were sure that their bodies could handle any type of heat. But the hottest place in the country runs by different rules, and they were about to learn that in the most brutal way possible. It was the 16th of July, 2019, on a lonely gravel road deep in the backcountry of Death Valley, where a husband and wife stood beside a rental car with two ruined tires, more than 20 miles from the nearest pavement, in a heat that can kill a healthy person in a matter of hours, about to make the one decision that would end both of their lives. Their names were Sunny and Cheryl Berkey, and they had come to Death Valley from Phoenix, Arizona, both of them in their mid-50s, married for the better part of 30 years. And the first thing to understand is that they were not reckless people and not strangers to heat. They had lived in the Arizona desert almost their whole lives. They had spent 30 summers in temperatures that would frighten most of the country and had a quiet, earned confidence about the sun and the sand that most visitors to Death Valley simply do not have. Friends described them as careful and organized, the couple who always had a cooler in the trunk and a plan for the day. Sunny had spent years working outdoors in that Arizona heat and considered himself, with some justification, a man who knew how to handle it. Cheryl was the planner, the one who read the guidebooks and kept the itinerary in a folder. This trip had been a long time coming, a delayed sort of celebration, the kind of thing a couple promises themselves for years and finally does once the schedule loosens, and by every account, they set out happy. That confidence was real, and for 30 years, it served them well. The trouble is that Death Valley is not simply a hotter Phoenix, it is a different animal entirely, and the very experience that made them feel safe was the thing that talked them past every warning they were given. Cheryl had wanted to see the sailing stones of the racetrack for years. In messages her sister would later share, she wrote about it the way people write about a thing they have quietly saved up for, the mysterious rocks out on the dry lake bed that slide across the mud on their own and leave long, winding trails, with no one ever catching them moving. For most of a century, how they moved was a real scientific mystery, argued over by geologists and blamed on everything from wind to ice. It was the strangeness of it that had caught her. Some photograph she had seen long ago of a single stone at the end of a long carved track, and she had held on to the idea of standing there for years. This trip was meant to be the one where they finally went. They knew it was summer and it would be hot. But they were desert people, and the heat was the part they feared least, which in Death Valley is exactly the wrong thing to fear the least. I do want to give them some credit here because these two are not fools. They knew deserts, they'd lived in one their whole lives, and that's exactly the thing that set this whole disaster off. To understand what happened, you have to understand Death Valley, because it is not like anywhere else on the planet. It is widely regarded as the hottest place on Earth by recorded air temperature, holding the officially recognized highest ever measured, a staggering 134 degrees set in 1913, a record still on the books today. Its floor sits as low as 282 feet below sea level, the lowest ground in North America, and that mix of low elevation and bone-dry air cooks the human body faster than almost anywhere else on the continent. In July, the air on the valley floor routinely climbs past 120 degrees. The overnight low can sit near 90, so that even at 4 in the morning, it is hotter than a summer afternoon in most cities, and dark rock and pavement can approach or exceed 190 degrees, hot enough to burn a bare foot and to soften and fail the soles of cheap shoes. There is a reason the Park Service warns so hard about water. They tell you to carry at least a gallon a day, and during strenuous activity to drink close to a quart every hour, because in the dry air, your sweat evaporates the instant it appears, and you lose water far faster than you would believe. Heat-related deaths happen here with a grim, tragic regularity, and almost every one of those people died believing they understood exactly what they were walking into. And here's what matters for our couple, because the danger of Death Valley is not simply that it is hot, it is that it is hot without any of the safety net that people who live in hot places quietly rely on. Phoenix is brutally hot too, but it is wall-to-wall with air conditioning, shade, gas stations, water, and cell signal, so a person can live a whole life in extreme heat and never once be truly exposed to it for more than the walk from a car to a door. Strip that away, and the same temperature that is merely uncomfortable in the city turns lethal in hours. The valley got its grim name from pioneers who nearly perished, crossing it back in the 1840s, and in all the years since, it has never stopped earning it. Here's what I don't think people understand about Death Valley. It doesn't feel like an instant death trap. It feels like a warm parking lot at first, and that gentle first impression is the most dangerous thing about it. The place Cheryl wanted to see, the racetrack, is one of the strangest and most remote corners of the whole park. For decades, the sliding stones out there were a true mystery, until researchers finally caught the trick of it in 2014. A rare mix of winter rain, thin overnight sheets of ice, and a light morning wind, working together to nudge the rocks across the slick mud, some weighing hundreds of pounds, leaving those long trails that had baffled people for a century. But the racetrack is not a place you simply drive up to. It sits at the end of 27 miles of rough gravel road, a narrow, washboarded track of sharp stones famous for shredding tires. So slow, the drive can take 3 hours or more each way, and the round trip eats a whole day. The Park Service flatly recommends a high-clearance vehicle with heavy-duty tires and signs at the visitor center, and along the road warn in plain language that ordinary cars, and especially rentals, should not attempt it at all, because they so often come away with flats. There is no cell service anywhere out there. In the cooler months, a breakdown is a long, expensive inconvenience. The sort that can end with a tow bill running into the hundreds just to reach a road that far out. And in July, when very few visitors attempt the racetrack at all, it is something else entirely. In the heart of summer, a person can wait a very long time before another vehicle happens by. At the Furnace Creek Visitor Center, Sunny had asked whether a regular rental crossover could really make the racetrack road, which is the kind of question a ranger remembers, and by that ranger's later account, the couple seemed relaxed and unconcerned, and mentioned they were used to the Arizona heat, having spent their whole lives in Phoenix. To them, it seemed Death Valley was just another warm desert. After they left the visitor center, no one saw every step of what happened next, and the timeline was later reconstructed from Cheryl's messages. The ranger who remembered their racetrack question, the time-stamped photos on their phone, the rental car, the note under the wiper, their tracks on the road, and the coroner's findings.
Think with me about how many chances they had to turn back. A warning at the desk, a sign at the road, a first flat tire, and each time they thought they knew better.
They had started early, which in Death Valley in summer is the one thing that gives you any margin. And by the reconstruction from their own photographs, they were onto the gravel road not long after sunrise, reaching Tea Kettle Junction by mid-morning and the playa a little before noon. That part they did right. What they had not reckoned with was how long the return would take and how much hotter the day would be by the time they were driving out. Their rental was a standard crossover, the comfortable, car-based kind you pick up at an airport counter, not the rugged, high-clearance truck the road really called for, and it rode on ordinary road tires. For a while, it felt fine, bumpy and slow, but manageable. The pale hills shimmering, the low creosote and desert scrub along the way. And then, somewhere along that washboard, the first tire went, exactly as the warnings had promised, and here is where a careful couple made the first truly costly choice. Instead of turning back toward the pavement while they still had a way to move, they put on the compact temporary spare, the little undersized donut wheel that comes tucked in the trunk and is never meant for rough ground or real distance, and because they were already within a few miles of the playa, it just barely carried them the rest of the way in, toward the rocks Cheryl had waited so long to see. You can almost hear the reasoning, the same that has killed so many people in so many places. They had already come all this way, spent the money and the hours, and turning around now, so close, would mean the whole day and the whole dream was for nothing. It is the sunk cost trap, one of the most human mistakes there is, the pull to keep pouring good decisions after a bad one because you have already paid so much to get where you are. They were close now. They knew they were almost there, and the desert, which does not care in the slightest how close you are to anything or how much you have already given up to get there, simply waited for them. The photographs pulled from their phone tell the first part of the story in their own quiet way, each one stamped with a time that investigators could later line up against the temperature of that day. There are pictures from the drive north, bright and ordinary and happy, the two of them on an adventure. There is a photo of the two of them at Tea Kettle Junction, a lonely signpost far down the road where travelers for years have hung old kettles for luck, both grinning in the white glare against a sun already fierce. And there is one last image from the edge of the racetrack itself, the flat lake bed stretching out pale behind them. A single dark stone at the end of its long carved trail, the exact site Cheryl had wanted to see for so many years. It is a beautiful photograph, and by every sign a joyful one, taken a little before noon. And it is very nearly the last thing their phone ever recorded because the heat was already climbing toward the point where the device itself would refuse to work.
Linda Brinson left a comment saying that it's sad when know-it-all types don't listen, and she nailed it, because that's exactly what we see in this story. And rather than feeling angry, I honestly feel quite a bit sad for them.
It was on the long way back out that everything came apart. Somewhere along that punishing gravel, the little donut spare, never built for such a road, finally gave out too. And this time there was nothing left to put on, and a bad situation became a lethal one. They were roughly 20 miles down that road from the nearest pavement, on a track that in deep summer might see only a handful of vehicles in a day, if that. And here is a detail that makes it somehow worse. Out at the racetrack, which sits far higher than the valley floor, the air that afternoon was probably only a bit above 105 degrees, nowhere near the numbers down at Badwater, and it was still more than enough to kill them. The engine still ran perfectly well, and for a while, they used the air conditioning in short bursts. But they did not know whether help would arrive in an hour or the next morning, and every minute of air conditioning meant less fuel if they had to survive beside the car overnight, so they shut it down and did without the cool air. When they reached for their phone, they found the thing that catches so many people out there. It had been sitting on the dashboard in the direct sun, and it had overheated and shut itself down, because a modern phone will switch itself off to protect its insides when it gets that hot, flashing a warning and going dark. Even if they had cooled it enough to bring it back, it would not have mattered, because there was no signal anywhere out there. So there was no map, no camera, no call for help. They had packed the basic emergency supplies careful desert people carry, but nothing in that trunk could solve 2 destroyed tires 20 miles from pavement. What they did have was the car, whatever water was left, and the narrow strip of shade beside it. They had brought several gallons, the kind of supply that looks like plenty when you load the trunk, but most had gone during the long, hot drive. And here the arithmetic turns brutal, because in that heat, doing hard physical work, a person can sweat away close to a quart every hour, and what they had left was nowhere near enough for an unplanned day stranded in the open. Even out there, the exposed gravel and dark rock can grow hot enough to cause contact burns. The vehicle still offered a small patch of exterior shade and a large visible target, and here is the part that makes this so hard to talk about. The single most important rule of desert survival, the one every ranger repeats until they are sick of the sound of it, is that if your vehicle stops, you stay with it. Because a car is enormous and metal and can be seen from a great distance, even from the air, while a person on foot in earth-colored clothing is a speck that all but vanishes into the ground. Sonny and Cheryl had heard that very rule from the ranger that morning. But hearing a rule in the cool of a visitor center and holding onto it while your car turns into an oven, while you crouch in the shifting sliver of shade and edge around the vehicle as the sun moves, and no other vehicle appears for hour after hour, are 2 very different things. The heat makes the sensible plan feel like slow death, and the fatal plan feel like the only way out.
What truly gets me is the phone. They had a map, a camera, and a lifeline, all sitting in a pocket, and the heat simply reached into their hands and switched the whole thing off.
What we know of their choice comes from the note, from the tracks that showed their direction of travel, and from the cruel logic of the heat itself. They did not walk right away. By the reconstruction, they waited with the car for several hours through the worst of the afternoon, hoping someone would come, and only after all that waiting, in that shrinking patch of shade, did they decide they could not sit any longer, and left a message tucked under the windshield wiper for anyone who might find it. It gave the time, and said they were walking out to find help. Then they started down the road on foot, into the full open sun, into the brutal late afternoon heat, in one of the most punishing environments in North America. It is easy, from a cool room, to call that foolish, and it was. But it is worth understanding how the desert sets the trap. Distances out there are deeply deceiving, because the clear, dry air strips away the haze our eyes use to judge distance, so a distant landmark looks close enough to reach on foot when it is truly many miles off. Sitting still while your body overheats feels like giving up, while walking feels like taking action, even when walking is the very thing that will kill you. They almost certainly believed the highway was nearer than it was, and that they could reach it before the heat did. They were wrong on both counts. The road was much farther than it looked, the heat far faster than they believed, and somewhere out there, in the open, the 2 of them ran out of the one thing the desert never returns, which is time.
Picture that choice for a second, because I still can't make sense of it. You stand beside the one big metal thing searchers can spot from the air, and the heat convinces you to walk away from it.
What the heat does to a body in that situation is not gentle, and it does not take long to arrive. First comes heat exhaustion, the heavy sweating, the weakness and pounding head, the dizziness and nausea, the racing pulse and cramping muscles, the body screaming that something is wrong. And if a person cannot cool down, and out there they cannot, it slides into heat stroke, which is where it turns lethal. The cooling system fails, the sweating may lessen or stop, the core temperature climbs past the point the brain can tolerate, and the mind begins to come apart. Confusion sets in, and clumsiness, and slurred thinking, and a strange, drunken loss of coordination, and a terrible failure of judgment. By that stage, even walking a straight line becomes hard, and people often wander off the obvious route without realizing it. This is the part that matters most in the story of Sonny and Cheryl. The decision to leave the car was very likely made by two people whose reasoning was already being cooked out of them, no longer working as it had that morning. It is one of the cruelest loops in nature. The heat damages the very judgment you would need to survive it, so by the time a person is making the worst choices, the illness that will kill them has usually already taken hold, and they are, in a real sense, no longer able to save themselves. It is worth sitting with that, because it changes how you see the note and the walk. Those were not the choices of two careless people. They were, most likely, the choices of two people whose minds had already begun to fail in the heat, doing the most human thing there is, trying to act, to do something rather than nothing, at the exact moment when doing nothing was the only thing that could have saved them.
Now, here's the part I keep circling back to. By the time they decided to walk, the heat had most likely already taken the one tool they needed the most, which was their own clear judgment.
The note under the wiper was short, and it is almost unbearable to think about now. It gave a time in the early afternoon and said, in plain and steady handwriting, that they had 2 flat tires, that their phone was dead, and that they were walking out toward the main road for help, and asked whoever found the car to please send someone. It was signed by both of them. There was nothing panicked in it, nothing dramatic, just 2 practical desert people leaving the kind of clear, sensible message they had probably left many times across 30 years of trips. It reads like a note left for a neighbor, and that is what makes it so hard, because they could not have known the note itself was the mistake, that the smartest thing they could have done was tear it up, crawl back into whatever shade the car offered, and wait for the search that would, in the end, come looking. The note was meant to save them. Instead, it marked the moment they walked away from their only chance. Neither of them made it to any highway. Sonny and Cheryl Berkey were found by search teams in the days that followed, National Park Service rangers and Inyo County personnel working the ground and the air not far from one another, well short of the pavement they had been walking toward, having covered only a fraction of the distance in that heat. The Inyo County coroner attributed their deaths to hyperthermia, the plain word for the body cooking itself from the inside, made worse by dehydration, the same way the desert has taken so many before them. The reconstruction the park rangers pieced together, from the direction their tracks led away, the abandoned car with its 2 shredded tires, the note under the wiper, and the timeline written into their photographs, told one consistent and heartbreaking story. They had most likely died that same afternoon and into the evening, within hours of leaving the vehicle, somewhere out on that open road under a sky that offered no shade and no mercy at all. There was no dramatic final struggle, no single moment of disaster, just 2 people slowly overtaken by an environment that gives the body almost nothing. No shade, no water, no relief even after dark, since the ground itself radiates the day's heat long into the night. They had come all that way to see something beautiful and rare, and the getting back had cost them everything. The search itself shows just how thin their margin was, and how close rescue came. The couple had been expected back that evening, and when the next morning came and they still had not returned or called home, family raised the alarm, and because they had asked about the racetrack at the visitor center, the rangers had a place to begin. The search brought in park rangers and county teams, and as these desert searches often do, aircraft to scan the empty country from above. The rental car, sitting out on that remote gravel road with its 2 flat tires, the kind of unimproved road many rental agreements openly discourage or forbid, was eventually located and became the key that unlocked the whole tragedy. The note on the windshield telling searchers exactly what had happened and roughly when. But finding a car is one thing, and finding 2 people who wandered off on foot across open desert where everything looks the same is a very different thing. By the time anyone reached that lonely road, it had been too late for a long time. Once they were reported overdue, help began moving toward the exact place they had left behind, which is the most painful part of all. The one thing the desert asked of Sonny and Cheryl was patience. The agonizing willingness to sit still in a bad spot and trust that being found was possible. And it is the one thing the heat and their own fear made almost impossible to give. Had they stayed with the car, in whatever shade they could find or make, and simply endured, there is a real chance the same search that found the vehicle would have found them alive beside it. That is the detail that haunts the people who worked the case. The car was found, they were not with it.
The thing I can't get out of my head is how close they really were. Help was coming, the car was findable, and the desert only needed them to sit still and wait for it. Because in the end, what doomed Sonny and Cheryl was not a lack of caution, exactly, and not stupidity, and not even the heat all by itself. It was a lifetime of the wrong kind of confidence. They had done almost everything right for Phoenix. They brought water, though nowhere near enough for that place. They wore their hats, they had sunscreen and a plan, and they were sensible, competent people. But every instinct they trusted had been shaped in a desert with gas stations and shade and cell signal and help just minutes away, where a breakdown is an annoyance and a hot afternoon is something you wait out in the car. They carried those instincts, unchanged, into a place that has none of those things, where the nearest help can be hours away. Their experience did not transfer, and worse, it whispered to them the whole time that it did. Every warning they were given ran straight into 30 years of being right about the desert. And 30 years of being right is a very hard thing to argue with, right up until the single time it is fatally, catastrophically wrong. This is what I want you to take from it. Death Valley might have been indeed an easy trip for them if they had gone prepared, but like they say, arrogance is knowledge minus wisdom. I do not tell this story to mock two people who died badly and afraid, because there is nothing to point and laugh about here, and because most of us carry that exact same quiet voice, the one that says the rules are written for someone less capable than we are. Sonny and Cheryl were kind, competent, ordinary people who wanted to see something wonderful together, on a trip meant as a small gift to themselves after 30 years, and the mistake they made is one a huge number of us would have made right alongside them, waving off the warning, pressing on after the first flat, because the thing we came for was so close. The lesson buried in all of it is not that the desert is evil, because it is not, it feels nothing at all, it has no malice and no memory. The lesson is smaller and harder than that. It is that a place like Death Valley does not care how much heat you think you have survived somewhere else, that its rules exist because other people already died learning them, and that the humility to follow a rule you do not fully understand, to carry far too much water, to stay with the car, to turn back at the first flat tire, is worth more out there than all the confidence in the world. They called it just a warm desert. It was the last thing they ever underestimated, and it did not need to be that way, which is the hardest part.